Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my YouTube channel today, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. It's not as sunny as I wish it would be today. It's a little bit cloudy here, but nevertheless, I hope it's sunny and beautiful weather out there in your place, in your region. And today, I want to talk about Sweden's model of neutrality and its involvement in global conflicts. Now, it's a bit of a political topic. Now, of course, I mentioned many times in the past that I'm not going to really discuss politics, but it's not really discussing politics like in terms of, oh, do you agree with, capitalism or communism or whatever, things like that. It's more of it's a bit multi-based in some ways. It's also historical, it's political, it's economic, strategic, a little bit of everything. So I'm not really going to go too deep into the politics and, discuss whether this is good or bad. I'm going to discuss a little bit more what Sweden is doing, how Sweden is reacting to the current war between Russia and Ukraine that Russia initiated, and so on and so forth. So I think I'm going to go through a couple of points here. I'm going to start off with Sweden's history of neutrality and then go on with what Sweden's currently doing these days with its military and what they plan on doing later on. So I think it's good to start off with Sweden's history a little bit, kind of like Switzerland, because as a Swiss person, I can highly relate and I know the historical context of the Swiss history, of its military presence and so on and so forth. Sweden and Switzerland are kind of similar, pretty similar in that sense. And I'll start off by saying that Sweden has been neutral for about 200 years. It hasn't been actively engaging in any conflict. It opted out of NATO at first in the 50s, I believe. It also refused to join the Warsaw Pact, so it wasn't, taking sides with anyone in particular. And this position began in the 19th century after the Napoleonic Wars and further solidified during the Cold War when Sweden chose not to join either NATO bloc or the Warsaw Pact. Positioning itself as a neutral party in European conflicts, this neutrality was seen as a cornerstone of Swedish identity, with the country often acting as a mediator in international conflicts. And that's something what Switzerland has also done. Ever since the Napoleonic Wars, I think it was in 1815 that Switzerland had its last war, so to speak. And ever since then, we've been pretty neutral, and Sweden is also kind of on that route as well. So historically speaking, Sweden never really engaged in any conflicts and any wars ever since then, for 200 years, roughly speaking, up until today, basically. Still hasn't, thank God, hasn't participated in any wars, and I pray that Sweden continues to maintain its safety and security later on. Now, the second point, now this is where we're going to get into the deeper aspects of what is happening today. Now, you have to understand that Sweden is kind of located in a position where they're kind of close to Russia. They're also close to Germany. Well, now Germany is no longer a threat. It used to be 80 years ago. And because of Sweden's geographic location bordering the Baltic Sea and close to Russia, Sweden has made its security a matter of strategic importance. And historically, Sweden's neutrality was partly seen as a way to avoid antagonizing its neighbors, such as Germany and Russia. That's what I said earlier. However, in the light of Russia's military actions in Ukraine and the growing influence of NATO in Europe, Sweden's geographic vulnerability has led to increased discussions about how best to protect its sovereignty. Sweden's military has undergone modernization in recent years with a focus on bolstering its defense capabilities in the event of potential regional conflicts. So you have to understand that Sweden is kind of positioned in a very interesting way, that they can also be attacked via the Baltic Sea, and Russia isn't that far away. If Russia were to take the whole Baltics, all the three Baltic states at once, and then they would have access to the Baltic Sea immediately like that towards Sweden and Finland and all the other countries, Poland perhaps as well, and so on and so forth. So that's why Sweden is now ramping up its defense capabilities. They're probably increasing their budget on the defense, which I think is a good idea at the moment. I think Europe has to wake the hell up at that point and start boosting its military, because Europe has been kind of sleeping in the last 10, 15 years or something like that. And now you have a big threat like Russia that's now, attacking its neighbor like that. and you see what happens if you're unprepared, if you're not ready for anything of that sort, if you don't have any proper capabilities to defend your own country. So I think it's highly important that Sweden is now rethinking its strategic location, its capabilities, and so on and so forth. And I hope that Sweden is prepared in some way, shape, or form, no matter what. Although I have to say that many countries in Europe right now aren't really prepared, especially, well, Switzerland is a small country after all, but so is Sweden in terms of population size. Sweden and Switzerland in terms of population aren't that big, really. They're about the same. Switzerland has a bit less than Sweden, but still, nevertheless, Switzerland, for example, I can say that Switzerland would not be ready at all. They would maybe last, let's say, a couple of days, maybe 3, 4, 5 days max, honestly speaking. Because Switzerland's so small, we don't have enough resources. We have a mandatory military basic training service that we have to go through. But if, you know, it's kind of like Finland. Finland also has this kind of model. But the question is that the difference between Finland and Switzerland, that Finland has gone through a lot of wars. They have a lot of experience and knowledge and all of that because Russia is their neighbor. So they always have to be ready for something like that. Switzerland, however, hasn't been active for over 200 years. And with a mandatory military service for everyone, nobody is really professionally trained enough to the point that they could defend itself for a longer time. Everyone has a basic idea, has a basic training of it, sure, is good. But I think having a professional army would probably be more effective. I would probably prefer quality over quantity in some ways. So I'm not sure about Sweden. If Sweden has a mandatory military service, I have to check it later on. Or you can leave a comment in the comment section down below as well. Now the last part is about Sweden joining NATO. Now, as many of you know, and especially the Swedish people, you guys have joined NATO, or not officially joined, but you have given an application to NATO, and they're now going through. I think there's like 2 countries that are like trying to block it or something like that. I think it's like Turkey and Hungary or something, especially Turkey because of the situation you have in Sweden with the Kurdish people. I'm not exactly familiar with that, but that's not really relevant at the moment. What's relevant is that Sweden is an applicant to become a NATO member soon, just like Finland is going to become a NATO member soon. And that is highly because of the fact that Russia attacked Ukraine. And Russia's actions in the Baltic region have been a key factor in Sweden's rethinking of its neutral stance. The increased Russian military activity, including the annexation of Crimea and its heightened military exercises in the Baltic, has led to a greater concern about Sweden's security. In response, Sweden has intensified its military presence in the region, conducting joint exercises with NATO members and reinforcing its own defense infrastructure, especially in the areas of air defense and naval operations. And Russia's actions have driven Sweden to reconsider its long-standing position of non-alignment. So at some point, you know, even the most neutral countries are going to rethink, you know, whether they should actually finally join a pact like NATO or not. And what's funny, or not, that's not funny, war is not funny, but what's interesting, I would say, is that Switzerland, for example, there was a lot of talk about Switzerland also trying to join NATO, but the thing is that we are already surrounded by NATO countries, because we have France, we have Germany, we have Italy, and so on and so forth. So technically we are not really in such great need to join NATO. Sweden, however, is not really surrounded by NATO states, really, and there's also a sea, you know, next to Sweden. So you're not really protected, quote unquote. But there was a lot of talk about Switzerland joining NATO, and if you were to ask me for my personal opinion on Switzerland joining NATO, well, it's pretty difficult to actually say, yes, I agree, I want them to join, or no, I don't want them to join. It's very situative, I would say. It very much depends on the current situation, very much depends on Switzerland's sovereign existence as a state, and so on and so forth. If I were to notice that Switzerland was under some kind of existential threat, then yes, of course, I would consider having Switzerland part of NATO. Now, as for Sweden, I think Sweden made more or less the right move on joining NATO, despite Russia's bluff on, you know, oh, if you join NATO, we're gonna nuke you and stuff like that. You know, it's all the bluff, and especially in the last couple of months or in the last 2 years. And I think in that sense, Sweden made the correct move in terms of joining a pact like NATO and also securing its existence right now, and also bolstering its military capabilities. I do believe that Sweden is making the right move, that they're increasing their military budget. I hope they are. I haven't really checked that, but I think everyone has to do that at the moment. Europe has to wake the hell up and really start equipping itself, because they've been sleeping for the last couple of years, especially in the last decade or so. So yeah, I think in that sense, Sweden made the right move. And times change, you know, adaptation is needed. So there's no country that has lasted for 1,000 years being neutral. There's always going to be some kind of conflict, some kind of war. Unfortunately, that is the nature of mankind. And as a Swiss person, as a Swiss citizen, I can highly relate to that. I can highly understand why Sweden chose to be neutral, and why now Sweden is trying to get out of its neutrality. When I say get out of neutrality, I don't mean like they're now banning neutrality. They are still, Sweden is still trying to be in a position where they can act as a mediator in international conflicts. I think that's what they're going to keep throughout the time. But I think Sweden is now trying to take a side finally, and trying to, I think they are waking up and understanding that, hey, there's a big country, a big bear like Russia that's, you know, currently attacking its neighbors, so we need to do something about it, type of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this interesting content. Let me know what you think about Sweden's position on joining NATO. If you have any further comments, please feel free to share them. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. I hope you have a good day.